Now, lecturers say they are afraid of being cancelled or even attacked for expressing controversial views in the classroom. I mean, this is outrageous. A new report from the Office for Students found that 1 in 5 felt pressure from senior staff to avoid offending students. Meanwhile, students themselves were told to expect material that could shock or offend. So there's some good news there. The most sensitive of topics: gender, race, international conflicts, especially the situation in the Middle East. Let's speak with Philip Kisley, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Good afternoon to you, Philip.
Hi, Ian. How are you? It's great to see you again.
Yeah, and good to see you as well. I mean, these are subjects that we really, in a sensible world, we shouldn't even be talking about this nonsense. But, of course, we have. That's why you guys at the New Culture Forum do great work, because of the insanity that seems to be growing around us. The idea that lecturers are scared to form a view or a controversial proposition because they might get cancelled. I mean, how did we get to this place? Surely I would employ the lecturer who's likely to be controversial.
Yeah, well, I've been there. I know all about it. We're looking at 1 in 5 here, Ian. 1 in 5 academics are frightened of talking about controversial things. Now, I think it's really important to understand what controversial things are in universities, okay? It's things like thinking that there are 2 sexes, and it's things like thinking that Israel has the right to exist. Those in our universities, this is how crazy it's got. Those are controversial things. Now, that just goes to show how far our universities are from insanity and from ordinary people. We got here, I think, Ian, because we've talked about this before, haven't we, with this fetish for identity politics, and you can really map it from about 2015. It starts with Me Too and everything starts going a bit crazy. Then you get BLM. Then everybody gets locked down and lots of men start thinking they're women, and you get the trans stuff happening. Trans activism goes on steroids. Then there's the environmental stuff, and now, for God's sake, it's Hamas. We're looking at that. We're looking at we're looking at people supporting terrorist organizations there. Now, one Russell Group University, at least one, had to put a notice on its website that said Hamas is a proscribed organization. This is the students. It's a proscribed organization. You must not support them. This is how crazy it's got. Yeah. So all of that stuff is free and open, but if you try and push back against any of that, then you're cancelled, you're closed down. Now, these academics were not just frightened, they were frightened of physical attacks as well. So that's how dangerous it is.
Wow. And it's interesting that sort of gender and race at the top of that. I mean, there's much more important subjects to get animated about than gender. How this one found itself as an A-lister on the list of things that trigger or fire up students' minds is bananas. But it seems, I guess, to some students, particularly of a certain political persuasion, it makes them feel like they're involved in a kind of the 21st century equivalent of sort of Martin Luther King battle for equity and fairness. It probably sits in that bracket. They think they're fighting for something that is a just cause and a human right. I can't think of any other reason why people would start talking mumbo jumbo and nonsense.
Yeah, it's something that they want to cling on to because they want to feel they're at the vanguard. They want to feel they're at the barriers. Yeah. They want to feel they're important as well, and they want to feel as though they've got some kind of meaning in their life. I think that all of this stuff is the list that I gave you before. It's all essentially the same thing. It's all back against heteronormativity, whiteness, the West, Britain. It's hating all of those things. So you can track it back to the long march through the institutions where this stuff just becomes absolutely normalized. And we've been feeding this poison to our young people in schools, in colleges and in universities for decades now. But you pour it together, it's like pouring 2 chemicals together. You pour all of this stuff together with social media and exposure and this fetish for activism and narcissism, and then it becomes really, really dangerous. I mean, when I was working in the sector, I've talked about this before. I was the victim of a campaign of Islamists, and they had posters of me all over the campus.
Nice.
my name, Philip Kisserly, a distorted picture of my face, like that. And Philip Kisserly is Islamophobe. Now, that is kind of quite scary, and that's dangerous
Yeah.
stuff. Kind of thing starts happening, you do have to kind of take care of yourself. So I think these are a lot of it as well is people not on campus coming into campus and being activists in that kind of way too.
Well, and is it getting better? There is a little bit of meat, Philip, and I might have this wrong, and maybe it's just sort of hopeless optimism. There is a sort of a slight sense, and I don't think it's just since the Supreme Court ruling, that's a big factor in this, that we might be turning a corner on this nonsense. Interesting to hear that students are themselves being told to expect material that could shock or offend them. I was really happy to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, you should do. Universities should be a marketplace of ideas. You should be offended by ideas. You should be able to push back on these. You should be able to argue against them. That's how you construct arguments. Yeah, I think you're right, Ian. I think something is changing, and it's not just about universities. It's about the broader picture as well. I noticed this yesterday. I even tweeted about it actually. This whole thing about Pride Month that was actually a religious cult a couple of years ago seems to have really died down now. I'm only semi-aware of it. I was in Marks and Spencer's the other day and there was a Pride thing there, but that's pretty much all I've seen really. So I think part of this is fashion as well, isn't it? Young people latch onto these things because they're fashionable, but I think they're becoming pretty unfashionable now. One, because they've been around for such a long time, and two, because they are absolutely the emblems of the establishment.
Of course.
There's a wave of young people who are really pushing back on that now. So I think some of this is beginning to turn. Also, I think things like all of the stuff around the rape gangs, all of the scandal that's just come out with the report, the Casey report, all of that kind of stuff. We're beginning to see how identity politics, political correctness is really poisonous and really dangerous, and people are beginning, rightly so, to be frightened of it. We need that fresh air of free speech, free expression, again, to push back on all of this stuff that we've been terrified to talk about for the last 10 years or so. Because those of us who have, we've just been called racist, we've been called Islamophobic, we've been called transphobic and all of that kind of stuff. And no, we're actually really talking about very serious things with very serious consequences. And if we look at what's been happening with the rape gangs, that's an extension of exactly the same thing. So people are now pushing back because they know they have to. We are on some kind of precipice. Things have to change. There needs to be some kind of, I don't know what you call it, a conservative revolution, I suppose. I don't mean that intellectually. I don't mean people going out onto the streets. I mean pushing back with ideas and changing the ethos. And
I'd like to think that. And, of course, it's a rite of passage as a student to be, for your views to be perhaps fairly new to the debating scene, so there's a level of naivety, or even if you really believe it. I don't have a problem with somebody who hates Israel. Good for them if that's their view. If they hate everything, I have a problem with somebody who seems to think Israel are the bad guys and Hamas are the good guys. That's a whole different thing. You can have views that are weird and wacky, and let it rest there. But for some people, they like the idea for some reason. There's almost the bullseye of these arguments is to get somebody to encourage somebody to lose their livelihood over it. That seems to be the sort of totemic result. Yeah, great, the lecturer got fired.
Yeah, there's a sense of mob mentality about it as well, and there's a kind of fetishization of violence almost. You know what I mean? You do feel unsafe in these places. But again, it's coming back to, yes, you can be confronted with crazy ideas, and I think that's good, but you've got to have the right to speak back. That you've got to be able to kind of say, well, actually, no, I don't agree with that because of this, this, and this. And I remember one institution just after October, in the aftermath of October the 7th, one institution had a session for undergraduates that was called, I think it was called something like Palestinian Performance and Resistance. This is after October the 7th. Now, it didn't have a corresponding session that was about Israel's resistance or anything like that. And ultimately, that's the problem, okay, with these places.
Yeah.
It's absolutely captured by leftist ideology and an enthrallment, a kind of fear as well of Islam. And that combination is pretty toxic, as we know.
Spot on. Philip, always great to speak. We will speak again as well. Thank you, Philip Kisley, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Basic kind of common sense stuff. So if you're ever bored, and I've done this and I'm sure I'm not the only one, and you want to look at, some videos of offended woke people, there is a whole kind of, sort of category of that on. It won't take long for YouTube to fire up a whole batch of these utter beauties of people getting absolutely discombobulated at the mere idea that someone has a different opinion to them, or that someone might challenge their opinion. And they're usually people who, you just know they've adopted the opinion rather than sort of philosophically found it through some kind of experience or research. They've latched onto it because they're in love with the headline of it. They're almost hardly ever know anything about the finer details of it, would never win any kind of intellectual argument if they were sat on a podium debating it with somebody who thought the opposite. But it is good fun. I mean, I went through a phase of watching Karen videos, and they're always a bit lively. They can be quite interesting, but the kind of offended woke videos are absolutely worth a gander. I mean, I wouldn't spend your evening doing it, but, if you're on a train journey, stick your headphones on because you'll have a giggle when they do. Stacey says, this is reference back to that issue of benefits. I think the reason for young people choosing benefits is that most jobs only offer zero contracts or temporary contracts. When they start renting a room or a flat, it must be so hard for them. And the temporary contract comes to an end and the employer releases them as they don't want to take them on full time. Then stuck, unable to pay their rent, council tax, etc., probably end up being evicted. It's no wonder they end up having mental health problems. It must be a real struggle for youngsters these days. They need to be into secure jobs with full-time contracts, which were the norm when I was younger, to allow them to move on with life. It's a very good point. Although I'm bound to say, I don't think you can, if you're like 20 and you haven't got any kind of reason to claim any sort of incapacity or disability benefit, I don't think you can get much more than a channel migrant, can you? What would you get if you just said, I'm unemployed? I hear many cases, well, you live with your parents? Yeah, well, we haven't got anything for you, mate. You couldn't really live on it. But I think the other point that I said earlier, which I raised earlier, that Stacey just did, and that's about the lack of optimism that has kind of got the sense of where am I ever going to improve? I'm not an entrepreneur. If I went to university and I was studying, law, for example, I'm probably going to become a lawyer, although AI might kind of scupper that to some degree. If I'm doing medicine, probably a fairly safe bet for a job, you might think, then yeah, I'm going to have something. So I've got those sort of qualifications and they're quite specifically attached to certain professions. I might do all right, but if I haven't got that and I've got to just get a standard job, that job might not offer any kind of hours, as Stacey said, and then I'm gone and I don't know, how do I ever, I'm thinking 10 years ahead, can I improve? I won't ever be able to improve it either, because there's no chance that I'm not qualified. I don't think I'll ever get a bigger qualification than I've currently got. So yeah, I can work in Mackie D's, I can work in Boots, I might get a job, I don't know, delivering something or whatever. It's never going to provide the kind of stability that you might have got even as recently as the 1980s or 90s, for that matter.